We're just going to do a couple more on incentive, give you an example. We'll do about another half hour's worth, and then peanut butter and jelly. I told you you'd have dessert. On the issue of incentives, these are just going to give you 3 more scenarios where there's just the possibility of incentives. And I emphasize possibility because even I, at times, have tried to figure out appropriate incentives for contracts. And the one procurement, I actually thought I had a good incentive scheme. I thought I had made something into a performance-based specification with incentives that would work for both the state and the contractor. And I presented it to the program, and they took gas. We can't do that. This is different than what we've done before. No, we don't want any part of this. Let's just do what we did before. And in that particular instance, it wasn't even the department I was with. I was doing something for another department. So, okay, if that's what you want, that's what you want. But at least I tried to get you to do something else. Other than that, a couple other times when I've tried, it's like, I can't figure out a good incentive. So I'm not saying that you can, I'm just saying that you have the opportunity to think, and maybe you can. But now we'll give you some more examples. For instance, if there is an inspection or audit of the contractor's operation by an independent entity, undoubtedly there will be contract requirements that the contractor must pass all such reviews. But typically the contractor can have some areas of deficiencies but still pass, i.e. that you must get 90 out of 100, 95 out of 100, etc., which means you didn't get 100. And if you get a certain threshold, you pass, etc. So you could, and this is something actually, this is one of the things I advocated for a contract about 2 years ago that ended up, we couldn't figure out how to really implement this. As an incentive, a bonus could be awarded if there are no deficiencies, i.e. if you go through and you score 100%, you get 5,000 more or 10,000 more or something like that. So that's a possibility. And will that incentivize a vendor? Maybe. So that's a possibility. The presumption is no deficiencies will mean the contractor is giving superior service. That's example number 1. Number 2, if there is a type of cost reimbursement contract with historical data on the level of costs. Cost reimbursement means we're going to pay you what it costs you to perform the contract. And say we know historically it costs $5 million typically. And it's gone from like 4.5 to 4.6 to 4.7, but we know in the ballpark it should be around 5 million at this point in time. We can say that we'll give them a percentage of savings if costs are below the historic level. That 20%, 10%, 50%, some level that they will be given if they achieve ostensibly cost savings, that they have avoided costs that they could have passed on to us. Or the incentive might only apply if the cost reduction is more than a given percentage below. That if you're 0.1%, we're not going to give you anything. Maybe you have to have at least a 5% reduction, and then we'll give you some kind of this cost avoidance savings. But ensure the reduction isn't likely to happen due to factors other than the contractor's action. Don't reward the contractor for something that it didn't cause. And that kind of revisits what we talked about on, I guess, the first or second day with the medical assistance program and the transportation, and trying to figure out a way to get a vendor to do the coordination of the transportation and them to share in cost avoidance. And we couldn't figure out a good way to do it, so we didn't do that procurement. Now here's one that this does happen, and this happens relatively frequently, and this is kind of like an easy way to apply it, which is fine if you're doing construction and isn't so fine if you're talking about services. In construction and many other types of contracts, often there are incentives for faster completion of the project than permitted by the contract. Example, if the project is to be completed within 12 months, there might be an incentive payment for completion in less than 12 months. X amount, $100, $500, $1,000 per day bonus, etc., if they do faster completion. Typically, this incentive would be offered when there is a tangible time value of earlier completion to the state or to the public. An example, i.e. when it is known how much and other types of costs may be saved by having the project completed sooner, some portion of the savings can be offered to the contractor, but you have to ensure that the time doesn't happen at the sacrifice of quality, that we don't pay them for doing it faster, but that means they don't do it as well. Offer some portion of the savings to the contractor, ensure that the completion time frame is not overly generous so that the contractor can complete the project sooner without commensurate extra effort. And famous example, in 1994 there was an earthquake outside of Los Angeles, what is called the Northridge earthquake. And it wasn't a terrible earthquake from the standpoint if it wasn't a 7.5 magnitude or 8 point, something like that. There were some people that were killed. There was a fair amount of property damage, but the biggest damage was that a lot of highway overpasses and bridges collapsed. And obviously, if you're going down a road and there's supposed to be a bridge and then the bridge isn't there, you don't go down the road anymore. And so this created a traffic nightmare when you have an area of 8 million, 10 million people, and the bridges aren't there so that you can't go very far. You have to find alternate ways to get there. And many bridges were damaged, including ones on 4 major highways, freeways. And the Santa Monica Freeway was one of these roads where they had numerous bridges that were damaged, and the Santa Monica Freeway was, maybe still is, the busiest highway in the country. So obviously, big problems due to the collapsed bridges. Much inconvenience for commuters and higher costs for businesses. So, you're the state of California. You need to get things back together. You need to get those bridges fixed. What do? You incentivize the vendors to do it. Time is money. So what they did was they issued repair contracts and focusing on these 4 major highways. On an emergency basis. Don't have time to go out on competitive sealed bidding, whatever. We got to get contracts awarded, contracts working. We got to get these things fixed. They pre-qualified the firms that were allowed to bid on these emergency contracts, and they told each of them they could get 1 award. So even if they bid for all 4, and even if they were low bidder on all 4 or 2, whatever, they were going to get 1 and only 1 because we want you to focus all your resources on one road, get it fixed, get it back in operation. Each road had a maximum time frame for completion. Each road had an incentive for completion of repairs in less time. And those incentives were a low of $20,000 per day to a high of $200,000 per day for the Santa Monica Freeway. The allowed time frame for the Santa Monica Freeway was 140 days, and the vendor got everything done in 66 days. Less than half the time. So the vendor at $200,000 a day got $14.8 million in incentives. And each of the other 3 firms on these 4 major roads also got done in much less time and also got millions of dollars of incentives. So I don't know whether total you're talking about $20, $30 million in incentives. So the question is, was the incentive effective? What was that?
I said, then you don't know if they did it in quality until...
Well, I'm presuming that they did it, that it met all the qualitative standards. I mean, they inspected these things. So construction, you can do inspection. So I think there was no question of quality. Obviously, to do this, the contractors worked 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They had huge crews in. They brought in every piece of equipment they could find, everything to accelerate time frame. And doing that, they incurred much higher costs for overtime, shift differentials, getting in extra equipment, things of that nature. So it cost them money to earn money. Obviously, the faster completion was greatly welcome. If you're a commuter, if you're a business, every day is important. So you were very pleased if it was 66 rather than 140. But then the question came up of, did we make the incentive too generous? If they did it in less than half the time, did we allow too long of a time? So you have this debate. Was it effective? Yes, it was effective. It was highly effective. Could it have been just as effective? Would the vendors have worked just as hard if the completion time frame would be 100 days? Maybe they would have, because they still would want to earn those incentives. But that's the issue with incentives. This just illustrates. You have to try to figure out ahead of time what is the proper amount that's going to be sufficient for a vendor to want to earn it, but isn't so much that when they earn it, you're going to say, daggone, if I'd only known that they would have gotten that much out of it, I would have made the incentives differently. It's hard to do.
Yeah, when you talk about 24 hours a day, what was it, what was the day's the schedule of the contract?
140 days is what they allowed in Santa Monica.
Okay, it would have, and they finished it in 66. That's 3 times. That'd been 100. You know what I mean?
Well, I don't even. Maybe
3 shifts.
they might have already anticipated 3 shifts, and the 140. I would expect that they would be working that.
I would have
And
been
yes, it would be certainly one thing if they did it, but they really weren't up to qualitative standards. Then you wouldn't have paid them because they also had to meet the quality. But here they made something like 4 times more money in incentives than they made for the actual contract value. Just an illustration. As stated before, incentives should not be so high that the reward exceeds the benefit to the state and possibly earned by the contractor without commensurate effort to earn them. Just something you can do. Incentives are not appropriate for many, if not most, state contracts. So I'm telling you off the bat, lots of times you will, even if you think about it, they won't be appropriate, but you also should try to think about it. Creating valid incentives is not easy, even for those procurements where they are appropriate. This is why historically incentives have been rarely used in most state contracts, but as part of the effort to focus more on results than just effort, agencies should focus on creating effective, affordable incentives for performance-type contracts, possibly in combination with the use of disincentives. And if you have a good incentive, let me know about it, and we'll spread the word. And we didn't do the medicinal exercise, but just revisiting what I already said about the medical assistance transportation, the difficulty of trying to come up with effective incentive-based contracts. All right, now, when a performance-based contractor seemingly is effective versus, and we'll say when it seemingly is not effective. When is it most appropriate to go after results without specifying how to achieve those results? Number one, when something hasn't been done before. Now, this is not hard and fast rule. This is just when things seemingly might be more appropriate. If there's no experience to go by as a guide, then you don't have anything to tell them this is what you should do because you haven't done it before. When the objective of the procurement is more abstract than tangible. End world hunger. That's fairly abstract. So that's something that allows for creativity and different approaches. When there is no accepted right way to do the objective of the procurement. And again, sometimes the right way, I kept emphasizing you need to revisit and don't always do it the same way. But sometimes you have, through trial and error, figured out pretty much what works. If you know what works, then it's counterproductive to say to the vendor, go out and figure out what you think is best and suggest to me what you think is best, when I already, for the most part, know what is the best way to do that. So these are when it's effective. When not to use performance-based contracting, when you know what you want. When you'll specifically know what you want. Then don't let vendors come in and have the opportunity to suggest something different than what you know you want after having gone through the exercise of, do we really want the same thing or something different? When through trial and error, experience, etc., it has been determined that the best results are obtained by following a single approach, when to a large degree you know more about what works in your situation than vendors do. If it's your contract, your facility, your circumstance, then you are in a position to tell them. And the only ones who might know even as much as you know might be an incumbent contractor. But anyone else is not going to be in a position to know what to even suggest to you as the best way to do something. So that's when it's up to you to tell them. But even in these circumstances, it may be advisable to permit a vendor to offer an alternate approach, which I said a little bit before and I'll say sometime later in this class. when not to use continued. Using performance-based contracting for an unsuitable activity wastes time and is expensive for vendors. So if you do this when you shouldn't do it, you're just wasting time and effort for you and for vendors. For them to try to identify a creative approach, it wastes time for you to evaluate the creative approach. It disfavors non-incumbents. It seemingly is giving everybody an opportunity to come in and propose something, but if there's a right way, and if you know that, and if your evaluation committee is focused on this quote-unquote right way, then anybody who doesn't already know that right way and comes in with something they think is creative will automatically, likely, be evaluated to not really understand the problem. If they understood the problem, they wouldn't have given us this creative solution. They'd have given us what we already have. Well, if that's what it's going to come down to, don't allow the vendor to come in and have them give you some alternative approach to something you know what you want. And let's see. A non-incumbent doesn't know what worked or didn't work, won't know what to recommend, is more likely to recommend something that is different from what is currently being done, and the agency probably will not like what is recommended. And an agency likely will rate a proposal higher that continues with what is perceived to work than a proposal that offers something different. Probably will determine that the non-incumbent doesn't understand the nature of the project, likely will reject or downgrade the different proposal. So this is when you should not allow vendors to come in and just offer to you how they're going to do the work. This is when you should specify under these types of circumstances. All right, alternative approach. Allowing offerers to propose an alternative approach to some or all scope of work requirements allows for the possibility that something has changed in the marketplace that may allow the procurement objective to be obtained better or at a lower price. So even if you do specify, even if you do say this is what you should do, if you're doing a sealed proposal procurement, you can say, you can give me an alternative proposal. So that you say, here's what you must meet, and usually for an alternative proposal, they have to give you one which is compliant with the specifications. And you allow them to give you an additional proposal which does not have to be necessarily compliant. It can be an alternative. So if you allow that, you're getting both worlds. You're specifying, you're getting response to what you specified, but you're allowing a vendor to come in and give you an alternative approach. A little more work for you, a little more work for the vendor if they choose to do it. You have to do some more evaluation, but maybe you'll get a better result. Just an approach you could take for this type of scenario. Alternative approach may constitute alternate or multiple proposals. If an activity has always been performed, these are examples of ways that you might allow alternatives. Because even if you allow an alternative, you can put restrictions on it. You can say either that the vendor may allow alternatives for this component or these two components or three components and nothing else, just these components. Or you can take the alternate approach and say the vendor may not give an alternative approach to one or two or three aspects and allow everything else open to alternative approaches. So you can even do that. Let's say, so again, examples. If an activity has always been performed by the contractor on site at an agency's location, you might allow the vendor to come in and offer to do it at their location with the presumption that doing it at their location, they might be able to achieve efficiency somehow and offer a lower price than if their people have to come to your location. That's a possibility. Or if an activity has been performed by the contractor with a specified number and configuration, labor categories, etc., staff, allow vendors to propose doing the activity with either more or less staff, different mixes of staff types, etc. Another example, if the activity is currently being performed with a given computer software program or a given configuration of IT hardware, allow vendors to propose different software, different hardware, even if doing so will require the state to purchase new hardware, new software, train staff, convert data, etc. You can allow them to do this. But this is the kicker. If you allow them to give you an alternate approach, what the focus is going to be is what's in this first bullet. When allowing vendors to offer something different from what is currently used or done, require them to explain why this other approach is better for the state. not for them, better for the state. So what they have to emphasize is what will be the benefit to the state in allowing or making an award by this alternate approach. It's going to be cheaper, it's going to be better, it's going to be something. It's going to give a far better quality for no more price, something like that, with the emphasis is on it's better than what you, the state, specified. And then you, in the second bullet, you can decide if you agree that what the vendor said is accurate, that it is in fact a better deal for the state, or maybe it's just a lot of hot air on paper from a vendor, and you say, nope, I don't agree with that at all, in which case you'll reject the alternate proposal. You still have the base proposal that you can consider, and you just reject the alternate. But at least you've given them the opportunity. And here's an example, and I'm going to use what I would say is an inappropriate example and then followed up with what might be an appropriate example. And these are just things pulled out of the air. Trash removal. When I was here, I did many trash removal contracts, so I guess I had some familiarity with them. Through experience, the agency should know the best combination of trash container sizes, locations, pickup days, frequency of pickup. You know whether you need a 6 cubic yard container or whether you need 5 6 cubic yard and 3 4 cubic yard, and whether you need one at this point in the facility and one over at that point in the facility. Because through trial and error, you know where the trash comes from, you know where it's easiest for the truck to get into, you know where to avoid possible contact with the residents of the facility. Through experience, you probably know, in a pretty good basis, what needs to be done for a trash removal contract. And we have this in Perform, actually, an example. As discussed in Perform, it is recommended that in-place contracts be modified when practical if a better way is to perform a contract is discovered after a contract is awarded. That's just kind of like an extra. That even though you think you know the best approach, if when you are operating a contract, if through observation or the vendor coming to you, they suggest something different, you can modify a contract to implement the better performance, the better solution, even right then before the contract is redone. All right, continue with inappropriate. Requiring vendors to recommend where to put the containers, the size of the containers, the pickup frequency of containers, including what day of the week that they will come and pick up, and putting that on the vendor to decide and have to come into your facility and to reasonably respond, have to really sit there and observe, because they're not going to have any inherent knowledge other than either having done it before, which means they're the incumbent, or just parroting what the incumbent has done before and saying the same thing, or an unlogical solution is spending days just sitting there and looking. Unless they do that, they're not going to be able to come in with an intelligent proposal for what to do, unless they've either done exactly what's been done before or observed, which is illogical. So non-incumbents will probably simply ask what is currently being done and offer the same thing, or even worse from their standpoint, not ask, offer something different, and since you already know what you want, you say, well, they obviously don't understand. If they're going to say we need a 6 cubic yard container and we've been getting along fine with a 2 cubic yard container, or if they say 3 days a week and we think we only need 2 days a week, you're going to downgrade them. You're not going to think they are evaluated as being acceptable, or they're going to be less likely to be awarded. And so it likely will serve no good purpose for this procurement to be done as a performance-based contracting. Plus the fact, what I said before and we'll say in the next slide, you can have alternatives. Alternate solutions may be permissible for non-performance-based contracting, even in a sealed bid procurement, which is not a performance-based contract. Aside from specifying what size containers, what locations, frequency of pickup, etc., what you typically will also say is, number one, you have the right to alter. You, the contract manager, can alter the pickup day. You can request additional pickups. You can have extra containers provided. You can change the size of the container, and you can cancel a pickup. And so by reserving the right to do this, even in a sealed bid procurement, the ones with asterisks, you will get a specific price for this. You will get a price for each size of possible container. You will get a price for each additional pickup. Extra pickups, extra container, the container itself. There's a difference between the frequency of pickup an existing container and putting in another one in addition to other ones. So if you get all this, you can do a sealed bid and have complete flexibility. You don't need to have a vendor tell you what is the appropriate way for you to have trash pickup. So this is just an indication of a situation where this is something that I would say specify it. Specify it, retain this flexibility, do a sealed bid and be done with it. Now here's an alternative where you can take sort of that same situation and turn it around a little bit and say that this might be a valid application of performance-based contracting. If you have a situation that heretofore you have done nothing but pick up trash, you haven't done any recycling, you've just, everything's gone in the trash, and the vendor picks up the trash, etc., and now you want to reduce the volume of trash, that you are more concerned with not just having trash picked up, but having reducing the volume of trash by having more recycling, and now you're coming into a different dimension. How do you get people, the employees, the people visiting the facility, segment bottles from cans, from paper, from plastic, etc.? How do you get people to do it? What is the most effective way to implement a recycling program? If that's the goal now, and the focus is on a two-tier situation, maximizing recycling and the things that are not recyclable then having trash, that's something, if you've never done it before, nobody has an inherent advantage in setting that up. And it's possible a vendor that does nothing other than trash pickup may not be able to come in with an effective solution to achieve a recycling / trash pickup type of contract. So this is something where you take the same scenario and put another ingredient into it, that it might change it from a not really susceptible performance type contract to one that might be appropriate for doing performance-based, where you have the sealed proposals, you have the vendor tell you how to maximize recycling and instances where they've implemented it and how it's effective. And then in addition, oh yes, by the way, we'll also pick up the stuff that is pure trash, etc. So just hopefully this helps illustrate those concepts, that sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. I think that's the last we have for that. Yes, that is. Any questions? All right. How many people want dessert? What do we have? 6 groups? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. Let's break into 6 groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7? 7 groups.
We only have 6.
Let's break into 6 groups. And if you remember, I'm not going to go back and show the actual slide if you want to find it in your slides. But what the assignment is in your group, you're going to write specifications for making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. So the first part of the assignment is in the group, write specifications. And I want you to write specifications 2 ways. The first way is as design specifications. You're going to, well, I'm not going to tell you any more, but I'm going to say by design specifications. So hopefully you will be able to interpret from what we've said before what is meant by design specification. Now, after you have written how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich by design specifications, write down actual specifications for performance-based peanut butter and jelly sandwich. We will give you probably about 20 minutes to do both of these, to write it both ways. And then, as I said last Friday, my capable assistant and I will distribute the peanut butter, the jelly, the bread, the plates, the knives, and maybe that's it. And, well, first of all, what we're going to have you do is exchange your specifications. And not just to the table behind you, but kind of across the room, so you can't keep turning around and looking to say, oh no, that's not what I meant.